So everyone, and welcome particularly to Aki Murata, who is a visiting scholar at Utrecht University and has agreed to do a research seminar for us about her work in lesson study. The title of your presentation is Preparing Future Teachers with Lesson Study Opportunities to Shape New Education. I'm really interested to hear about your work, so over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here today. It's very nice meeting you. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay. Here you go. So I am okay. Hold on. Yeah. So I was formerly an education professor at Stanford University and University of California, Berkeley. And my area of expertise is mathematics education and teacher education, and primarily using lesson study as research context to study how students and teachers learn. That's my work so far. And I'm currently a visiting scholar in Utrecht, as I was introduced, and it's wonderful to be here. So thank you for making time for me. So today's presentation, I understand this is a very broad. This is the audience that represents broad interests. So I want to start with what lesson study is quickly, and why lesson study in pre-service education is important. And from there, I want to present two models of cross-cultural implementation. So one in US, another one in Norway. I just merely want to present examples so that we can kind of start seeing how that lesson study is actually originally from Japan, some form of anything, right? Anything in one culture is adapted to another culture. It changes its shapes, its structures. And so I want to see I want to kind of share two models so that we can start to think about it. And so identifying processes and goals, and then the big question and discussion that if we have about, as I practiced this morning, we should have about 20 minutes or so to discuss. And I'm happy to answer questions, but how can this means lesson study be effective form of pre-service teacher development in the Netherlands and other EU countries, given the cultural differences? I would love to learn from you today for that. So lesson study, very quickly, this is a form of professional development, learning format that it's a very simple idea, really, that in Japan, it's been used more than 100 years, 120 years now. And it, in the very simplest form, lesson study is like two teachers who teach in the same school discuss their teaching based on the students' learning. So for example, I may be the first year teacher teaching the second grade, and I teach according to my textbooks, and somehow the lessons do not unfold the way I anticipate. So I may just go to my next door colleague who may have had many years of experience teaching second grade and ask her why lesson turns out to be certain ways. And then she may say, oh, that's interesting. I'm teaching it tomorrow. Would you like to come and watch? And I may say, yes, please. So I may go there and watch her teach and take notes. And we discuss why students learn in a certain ways and what she learned, what I'm learning. And then she may just come to my classroom the following day to kind of observe and we share notes. That's lesson study too. Or in Japan, really, like we have like a national level lesson study where they implement like a new new educational idea, and hundreds of people come together in the auditorium watching a lesson with students learning and discuss. That's a very powerful form of lesson study. So if you're interested in those different ways we do lesson study in Japan later on, I'm happy to have this conversation. But so the basic idea is we teachers study and then plan a lesson and teach the lesson while observed and reflect on the student learning later on. So just switching gears to pre-service teacher education. I know not all of you are in that field, but pre-service teacher education often means education for that happens at the college level, usually at the bachelor's degree level or master's level, to prepare teachers to become classroom teachers, right? So the challenges are, because schools change all the time, ever-changing schools. Oh, and just a disclaimer here. When I talk about my research, it's usually based on U.S. schools. So I'm not talking about Dutch schools. I'm not talking about Japanese schools. So just so that you know, and I would love to hear if you have ideas later on. Oh, in Dutch schools it happens other way. So in US schools, student diversity is increasing in many different ways, and we need to find ways to include them meaningfully in classrooms. And also the society is changing too. So then preparing students for the changing society, we have to teach differently, and content standards are revised every few years, and we need to help teachers understand to teach new content in classrooms. And also, more importantly, in my mind, shifting teachers' mindset to teach differently, because many teachers who come to pre-service education programs, many or all of them, they have their own knowledge from when they were students, how school was. But new teaching practices are different from their experience as students. And, we used to say teachers are like delivery persons, like delivering packages, right? They bring the textbooks, they just give the knowledge to students, deliver the knowledge to students. But we are not saying that anymore. We want teachers to kind of have the agency to own their own practices, and we want them to become curious classroom researchers, that they ask questions and understand how kids learn and continuously improve their teaching. So that's a very different kind of teacher mindset that we want them to have. And then teaching is complex. That, no question about that. It's not an easy thing to do. And also, like in the US, we are increasingly saying teaching is a collaborative profession. So we used to be that, if you're a teacher, you close your door and do your thing. Don't complain. Don't say anything negative, or you're going to be judged. But now we are saying, teachers should talk and investigate and learn together. So that's a new way of preparing teachers for sure. So lesson study has a value and possibility in pre-service teacher education, in the way that in doing lesson study, pre-service teachers make connections among different parts of teaching. So typically in pre-service educations, teachers learn how to plan lessons, how to teach lessons, how to assess kids' learning, so those parts are discrete from each other, but lesson study kind of connects them all. So that's a nice experience there. And then while they are teaching, they develop content knowledge and pedagogical content knowledge. And that also means the scholarly knowledge, being implemented in practice in a classroom-based, practice-based research. And in doing the research, they experience student learning and implementing new teaching approaches. Those are part of the research process. So that creates new teacher identity as more active agent of change, and that creates professional collaboration. So now, so that's my spiel of what lesson study is so far. Do you have any questions before I go into comparing models? Because I don't want to leave you behind if you're thinking, well, I still don't understand what lesson study is. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer.
I don't think there are any questions yet.
All right, so I will move on then. So comparing models today. So two pre-service teacher lesson study models I want to talk about. So one is mine, I used in the States. So again, the lesson study came from Japan. So this is adaptation in the US. And another one I want to talk about is in Stavanger, Norway. And I worked with the group of teacher preparation people for about 5 years in Norway, kind of helping them create their own lesson study. So, from here, about 10 slides, I'm going to go very quickly, but, kind of compare different models. So in my model, I used the lesson study between 2005 to 19. So that was 14 years. But, 14 years means like every year I taught different group of students. And I taught elementary math teaching methods courses. And usually I taught that course is a year-long course divided into like 3 sections. So I got to work with the same group of teachers for 12 months. And in my case, like those pre-service teachers were already in year-long practicum, meaning they were in classrooms doing student teaching. So they came to my class like 4 o'clock in the afternoon after having taught in the morning. But then that meant they had some classroom-based knowledge there already, so that was good. And I taught this 14 years, but that means every year I made modifications and revised it to meet student needs and made it better. So the Stavanger, they've been using it since 2012. So it's been 9 years they're using this. And the reason why I became involved with their project was they received a very large funding from the Norwegian Research Council to implement lesson study for all teacher education courses in the university. So that was unique. So that meant all subject areas, all grades, like kindergarten through high school, all subjects at the university, they all used lesson study at the beginning. And so but the typical teacher education students who did lesson study were 30-year undergrad program students. So about 20-year-olds, right? And they were not doing student teaching like my students were. They were taking courses on campus, and they had like student teaching for 3 weeks during the course that they went to classrooms. And so for that Stavanger group too, they collaboratively investigated, improved, and refined their lesson study over time. So again, this is just to remind you, lesson study is, we both use this basic model of study, plan, teach, and reflect. And also, like, I'm the one who introduced lesson study to Stavanger people. So we have the similar baseline there, but of course it turned out very differently. So my model, we always start as my pre-service teachers interviewing their mentor teachers about how to teach topics and challenges to teach, because pre-service teachers lack the knowledge of that. So after they interviewed the mentor teachers, they examined content standard materials to understand how that's taught, why that is. So for example, like if they interview their 6th grade teacher or 5th grade teacher and they say division of fractions difficult, then they just examine the content standards and other things to learn how that's being taught. And then after that, I sent the pre-service teachers to pre-assess a sample of students for and it's a pre-assessment can mean 1 problem or 3 simple problems, but I wanted each one of them to assess students from their own classrooms. Remember, they're in student teaching full time, right? So then when they came together, they had a set of data from different classrooms, so they analyzed it together. And then they studied textbook materials, curriculum research to see why some students have certain challenges and how to teach. And then they planned, they start with the existing lesson modified to fit the needs of students. I rarely I really kind of impressed the fact that I wanted them to start with existing lesson, don't invent from their mind. And I can talk more about that, why that is. And then, you know, planning, narrowing and specifying research question, identifying data collection points. It took a while to get there. And then one teacher taught, others observed, and then they discussed student learning observed in the lesson based on the data and discuss possible revisions. So this was my model. When they went to Stavanger, it changed the shape because of the different setting of the courses and situations, as well as their values and priorities, right? So as you recall, these students are not in classrooms. So they start with the student teachers or pre-service teachers meeting with their mentor teachers and then collecting basic information on you know, learning aims during the practicum, typical challenges. So this became the first meeting with the mentor teachers. And then studying syllabus, like content standards, textbooks, and identifying research themes and question settings during the time that they were in their classrooms for the 3 weeks. So it became very focused on that, to kind of that period of time, whatever the content they are covering is what they are going to teach. And plan a lesson and then identify case pupils with special focus with help from mentor teachers. So the case pupils could be students who are quiet and do not participate, or the students who have who are learning the language as second language, or other special, you know, cases that they individually focused on these students. And then again, meet with the mentor teacher again, review and feedback the lesson plan. This happened so quickly, I'll talk about that later on. And then one teacher teach, others observe, and at the same time, they interviewed case pupils after the lesson. And so when they reflected, their discussion focused on how these case pupils experienced the lesson. That was the focus of it, and revised the lesson. And then they retaught the lesson in another classroom all over again. So another teacher taught, and others observed and collect data, and then interview the case pupil, and then came back and reflect again. So similarities between two models, both models, of course, they follow the same lesson study process. I talked about this already. And they both emphasized on research with the lesson study. You know, they both had research questions, data collection points, research write-ups, and they used multiple guideline documents. You know, I created them, they created them, so that pre-service teachers could follow the process. And, you know, pre-service people are a little bit different from in-service, not little bit, hugely different from in-service people in the way that this is a coursework that they're getting credit and grades. So, you know, we require certain things and they follow the guideline. That's how it works. So, you know, I created student pre-assessment guideline, lesson plan format, template. We both use similar ones. Kyosai Kenkyu is like a curriculum study, worksheets and lesson debrief protocols. Those are used. And then also we both models focused on student learning and thinking. But there are differences. My model, the biggest thing, not biggest, but the significant difference is I drove that lesson study in my classroom. So, and then also my teachers had long-term practicum placements, meaning that they knew the students, they knew the classroom. And we did one cycle of lesson study and we did the pre-assessment. And, you know, although I emphasized using research literature and everything at the beginning, after the planning period stage, it was more of integrating research with teaching was my focus. And the planning lesson lasted 3 weeks in my course, and that's, you know, because I needed to, I wanted to help them really kind of refine the parts of the lesson, research goals, research data collection. So I took a long time for that. And at the end of the course, I had students, pre-service people create group portfolio and about specifying group learnings. Compared to that, Stavanger model mentor teachers played a critical role. If you remember, they were in a classroom for 3 weeks and they were not coming to campus. So, and so that was 3 weeks period, and they did the revise and reteach. They used case pupils, and research emphasis was throughout the process with guideline documents. And that was, the planning happened in 1 day. Compared to my 3 weeks, that was 1 day thing, but it was more like a more normal teaching cycle, I guess. The mentor teachers don't spend 3 weeks planning a lesson. So, and then at the end of the course still, they required individual paper on the research theme of their choice. So there is another difference there. So, but then what are these differences mean, right? So the context-wise, instructor-driven and have long-term practicum means pre-service teachers have the knowledge of students and schools, and instructor and pre-service teachers collaborated, and then also tight communication with mentor teachers. I learned that. I had to let them know what's going on or it's not going to happen. So I learned that one. Stavanger model, context-wise, the critical dependence on mentor teachers to provide classroom information because students did not know. And mentor teachers did the lesson study, and mentors teachers, so you know, the Stavanger group, they offered a workshop for teachers, I mean, mentor teachers to come and learn how to do lesson study. That was unique. And research and teaching wise, so in my case, emphasis was careful planning and studying, and then that usually it rarely happens in teaching, right? But you know, the careful planning, long-term studying is my emphasis there. And research literature was used to inform teaching at the beginning. And you know, so the research activities are designed to inform teaching, right? Not that particularly that they are doing research, but I wanted them to use the research for teaching. Stavanger model, the revising, reteaching helped to develop teacher expertise with the lesson, and the teaching is treated as a research process from the beginning to the end with frequent reminders through guidelines and everything else. Another difference in terms of understanding student learning. So I used pre-assessment and used research-informed assessment protocols, data collected from handful of students from multiple classrooms, but compilation of data represent a large and broader student sample. So yeah, and to replicate the findings of previous research, that was my goal. And focus on using individual student data to understand whole group learning. So, and you know, this is like my reflection later on, that I am still very much Japanese in the way that knowing the individual student learning is not enough for me. I wanted my student teachers to kind of get the broader sense of learning by seeing students. Stavanger group, again, this is not good and bad, but they really focused on case pupils, right? So the choosing case pupils per classrooms, and then strong focus on how they're experiencing it. And so the focus was on pre-service teachers to understand the lesson from the case pupils' perspectives, which is important, but it's different from my important place, right? And in the final reflection, I did the group portfolio, consistent focus on collaboration. Stavanger group did the write-up individual paper. Again, the focus on group, focus on individuals. So then, you know, but then all these are the differences. So what are the goals? What are we getting out of this? So again, this is the summary, right? We did this already. So my motto is pre-service teachers and I did the lesson study research activities to inform the teaching, long planning, and we focused on group learning and then did the group assessment. The mentor teachers did the lesson study with them. Teaching was treated as research, and short planning. Pre-service teachers really focused on case pupils, and then they did the individual paper writing. So what are they learning out of that? So because this is what we want to know, right? So in my model, hopefully my pre-service teachers learn that how to use research for their teaching to inform how students learn, and also how different individual student learning frame a larger group learning trajectory, because that's important in Japanese teaching. And also careful planning helps anticipate lesson progress and better response to student learning. And the value of collaboration throughout the semester, there is no question about that. But again, Stavanger model, what they learned was how to conduct research as a part of teaching and understand how different students experience the same lesson differently based on the case pupils, right? And lesson can play out differently with different set of students because they did the reteaching thing, and then balancing individual and group work with lesson study. And again, like when we compare different cultures, do things differently, this is never which is better or worse or good or bad, but that's like this is the reflection of different values and beliefs, I think. And so in my case, I still consistently focus on, collectives and collaborative learning, and the Stavanger model focused on more research and individual learning at the end. So then this is my big question for you. And also, I look forward to discussing my study, my work with you too, but what do you think are the aims and processes of lesson study in the Netherlands and other EU countries? And, Sarah's here, so when it's used in England, it's a different kind of thing too. And so I'm just hoping that maybe we can open up conversation on this today too. So thank you. This is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I think I saw somebody writing in chat here too. Oh, somebody had to go. Okay, good.
Yeah, and Sarah asked the question in the chat. Maybe you could take that, and then we can open it up for wider discussion and reflection. And I think Sarah had a question about the time between the first and second teaching of the lesson in the Norway model. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Very short, and also it's the same content, same lesson taught in different across classrooms. So they are different classrooms of the same grade level or same content area. So yeah, usually it's like next day or the day after next. Their planning and revision cycle is very short.
I was also maybe following up on that, kind of wondering, because the two models are so different. And I mean, Japanese lesson study has been promoted as a model with specific features. I guess a more reflective question is, to what extent is this still Japanese lesson study as it's kind of being described in some of the literature as well? Or is this just a kind of wider thinking about professional development of teachers which would be more interactive, or making more use of research, or more incorporating more collaborative practice?
Yeah, I think it's still very unique in the way that some schools, some programs use lesson study, right? Like I've done this work for about 2 decades now, but in most cases, pre-service classrooms, what happens is they may do case pupil study or assessment study or lesson planning or observing mentor teachers teaching, but never together in a research way, like you set the goal, plan the lesson, teach the lesson, collect the data, talk about it. I don't think this happens too often. So so that way, in a much bigger sense, the schools who are using lesson study, I think we are very similar. Lesson study, when lesson study was brought out of Japan and when they started implementing in different places, I mean, of course, they changed the shape, and that's expected because they have to be used in certain culture, right? Cultural context. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. We can learn about the cultural values in the place which is using the lesson study, as well as what features of lesson study are most critical in just the keeping right with in conducting lesson study. So I know I have colleagues who like to talk about more exclusively, what is lesson study and what is not lesson study. But I would like to be more inclusive. That I think, when teachers want to get together and talk about practice and teach and watch each other and discuss, I think that is a lesson study, but different form of lesson study. And, again, like if you go to Japan, there are 100 ways they do lesson study too, because lesson study is like synonymous to teaching. So yeah. It really doesn't make any difference there. Like, yeah, like if everybody's teaching but teaching differently, but it's still teaching.
Yeah. I'd like to give all of the people in the room also an opportunity to talk about their experiences with lesson study or maybe teacher professional development and reflect on what you've been saying. And we have a question from Ewe. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? Do you want to pose the question, maybe introduce yourself also and some of your background with this? I think you need to unmute. Yeah, great.
Yeah, my name is really Ed, but somehow my official name always comes up. I don't know why. Maybe I submitted it one time.
Ed is a bit easier for us, so that's good.
Hi, Ed. That's easier.
Yeah, so I would like an example of what an individual pre-service student learned when confronted with a particular difficulty in learning mathematics. And that could be any topic, just choose. But I'd like to get such an example.
Can you also say a little bit about your own background and work in this particular area?
Yeah, I've been involved in science teacher education in Indonesia and in the Philippines together for 17 years, and then in the Netherlands for more than 20 years. And I'm retired, but I'm still 1 day a week active in the teacher education program in Twente.
Great.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for being here today. So you said pre-service teachers experiencing challenges learning mathematics or teaching mathematics?
Teaching mathematics, but they come in a classroom and maybe with one of these case study kids or any kids in the classroom, they find a particular mathematics problem. And now how do they cope with that? So within this lesson study, and what does the pre-service student learn?
Yeah, I mean, they have challenges with most math content. I would say, in the United States anyway. Even in universities such as Stanford and UC Berkeley, students, so maybe I should say this. So like I got really elite students, who wanted to become pre-service teachers. That was great. But they were elite because they were great at learning procedures and taking tests and getting good grades. So they were great students, right? So when they came to my class, what I had to do was just breaking that down altogether. That's not going to help you teaching math. And so that the savior complex starts, right? Like, because I was a great student, I can just teach my students to be just like me, and then they're going to be great students. It doesn't work that way. So like, especially like elementary school level, I had to teach my very high achieving math students, the college level math students, that actually kids see things this way. Kids see things differently. Or for example, like even like very simple using like addition algorithm or subtraction algorithm, right? Those vertical, like put, I mean, I don't know how you guys do it, but put the numbers vertically and then just calculate by the columns. Really kind of breaking it down, why you do it, how does it work? And they're using manipulatives to show it, right? So when you regroup 10 into 10 ones, this is how it looks like. So then when you add or subtract from that 10 ones, the answer will be different. And because, if you are teaching first graders or second graders, you need that kind of concrete examples, or kids may learn how to manipulate numbers, but they don't understand conceptually why that is. So yeah, like really kind of bringing them down to something more concrete, more visual, more something they can just use, really using fingers, using counters, using circles. That's always a way. And if I don't do that purposefully, they would just assume that, addition's easy, division's easy, and why are my students getting it? Because they're not as smart as I am. And that's a very dangerous place for teachers to be. So
how does the research come into this then? Because the Japanese lesson study model is because this to me sounds like you're just teaching how to do that. But where does the lesson study model come into this in terms of them studying research and using research to understand how to better teach this?
That's a different question, right? I thought that Ed asked me more in general. How do pre-service teachers experience challenges in teaching math?
Okay, but also the second part, how does the classroom experience then help them to convert to a more conceptual view of the difficulties that their pupils have?
Yeah, so I mean, that can happen in lesson study or not. So if the pre-service teachers can have the experience in classrooms doing math in more conceptual way and more concrete way, and then they experience how students actually make sense of math that way, instead of like just the abstract manipulation of numbers and symbols. I think that's their learning as pre-service teachers. And going back to Melanie's question, if pre-service teachers want to do this as a group, like so I don't know, for pre-service teachers who are all placed in second grade classrooms, want to plan a lesson of like place value, but using concrete examples to teach place value, and then they teach a lesson, they observe the lesson, take notes, and then really kind of compare student learning from before. I think that's their concrete experience and how this kind of teaching works in classrooms.
Yeah, I guess I'm still trying to conceptualize how they connect to research to do this, because to me that's also the uniqueness of the lesson study model, is that you use specific cases or lessons to connect to research and to bring in research findings to improve your teaching. And how do you allow them to do that then?
So, at the beginning of the research, the lesson study process, when they identify the topic, especially for pre-service people, I usually take the responsibility of bringing in some research articles, not 50-page paper, but something teachers can read. And, often the research article that includes some classroom examples is great. or something, or I may just bring some figures and tables from very dense research article and then have them discuss what they see in the table so that they can kind of make sense of the essence of the research that can be applied to their teaching, right? And then when they plan the lesson, I make sure that they identify where they're getting the idea and including in their lesson plan, so that when they teach, they can use that. Like for example, I remember one time, this is not pre-service people, but in-service people, they wanted to do lesson study on subtraction, and that was a cross-grade lesson study group, meaning first grade teacher, second grade teacher, third and fourth and fifth grade teacher wanted to teach together. So so therefore, like subtraction was a concept that goes through the grade level. So I thought that would be an ideal one. And I had a couple of articles to read in the group. And as they are reading, I don't remember, maybe the fifth grade teacher, fourth grade teacher said, no, I've never seen this before. My kids never do this math this way. My kids never think this way. And she's a veteran teacher of 20 years, right? And so that was a like welcome challenge for me. So I said, okay, as we teach the research lesson, let's really observe how kids are thinking and showing their work. And of course, kids did that. And the teacher was shocked that her kids actually thought that way if the problem was given in a certain way. So that we can learn so much by doing this. And also the beauty of lesson study to me is they have the long time and the context and collaboration to really kind of discuss tiny thing, student learning, and that's that they have the permission to do so. That's a luxury in teachers who are always busy running from one place to the next, like all of us here. Yeah. But I appreciate the question though. Thanks, Melanie.
Yeah. Sarah, I know you're coughing, so to ask you a question, but I would be interested to hear about your experiences in England and other countries as well. Have you seen this model being implemented for pre-service teachers in England, or maybe to share some of your experiences as well?
Yeah, so I work with a few professors who are using it in pre-service teaching. It's been difficult to get what are quite sort of traditional pre-service training programs to free up the time to devote to lesson study. And there have been lots of different experiments with the ways that mentor teachers are involved. So my colleague Rosa Archer, for example, at Manchester University, she trains maths teachers for children aged 16 and over. And she's been involving the mentor teachers in quite a unique way, in that the student teachers plan the lesson, but the mentor teacher will teach the lesson. And the reason she's done that is because she said that then removes all the sort of classroom organization and behavior management challenges that you might have in a lesson taught by a student teacher. And it allows the student teachers to focus on the mathematics and how the concepts are taught and understood and experienced by the students. So that's the model that I know most about. And my question that I was wanting to ask was actually about the role of mentor teachers, actually, and whether you think that the mentor teachers also benefit from taking part in the pre-service teachers' lesson study process in your model and in the Stavanger model as well.
Yeah, so Sarah, in my experience, I had mentor teachers did the classroom management part while student teacher was teaching, right? And so the mentor teacher still stood there, and her presence makes a difference for kids actually. So like, and it's too much to ask for pre-service teachers to have the complete control of student behaviors in the classroom. So when things starts happening, that's the mentor teacher who can go around and manage that part of it. But at the same time, like when I did it in California, I always invited mentor teachers to come to like a debrief because they're there anyway, observing the lessons. So I love that when they provided their observation, what they noticed, because they know the students really well. So that was beautiful. And also, like, a few mentor teachers actually later on contacted me saying, this thing called lesson study that you are doing, that sounds really interesting. Can you come and just help us do this in our school? That was great. That was like a more, like their, the individual experience-based curiosity that they wanted to do it. Stavanger's case, from the beginning, they told me being a teacher in Norway means they are teacher educators. That's being said over and over and over again when they become teachers. And when you're a teacher, you're a teacher educator. Your responsibility is there to educate future teachers. So they take on the responsibility really well, they said. But that, creating the teacher workshop for mentor teacher workshop on campus, that was a lot of work for the university colleagues. And then recently they said that they don't do that anymore because that was just way too much work for mentor teachers to come. So these days they just rely on certain number of mentor teachers who has done it already, as well as their own graduates who are becoming mentor teachers to conduct a lesson study, they said. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that this is quite a time-intensive model, but it is also kind of a very new way to think about your role as a teacher as well. And I think that there's a huge benefit in that as well. Yeah. To kind of share a responsibility to develop the knowledge base collectively instead of just being trained to do something. Yeah. It's a complete change in mindset, I guess, about what it means to be a teacher. And I guess, reflecting on the Netherlands, that's a long way to go for many teachers here as well, I think, particularly because we have a very textbook-driven profession who are just used. Many teachers, I guess, probably not everyone, are quite used to just following a curriculum and set of textbooks, instead of having to develop their own materials collectively, think about learning trajectories of students and finding relevant material to that. I know I've worked in the United States in the past for a couple of months as well, and I know that there's not so much of a textbook-driven approach there, or availability, not in every context at least. A set of standardized materials that everyone uses. So at least my experience there at that time was that they had to really develop and find relevant materials themselves and as a group within a school. So I guess the extent to which that varies, it also would impact on how they would kind of use this model, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point there, but sorry. In the United States, each school is different, right? So like you can't say in the US this way, actually, some schools have very
quite different.
Strict scripted textbook curriculum. Other places don't have anything. So, yeah. But what I can say is in Japan, textbook is used in every classrooms. That's a nationally required curriculum. So, but because they have the common curriculum, that creates the opportunity for them to really study lessons together. So that's actually a wonderful thing, that they are committed to using the textbook. So they really kind of, research one lesson at a time, but in a very neat way. So I think that there's using the textbook is one good thing, as long as it's good.
It's an interesting one, because it seems that then becomes a really important condition for that group-based collaborative work practice that's part of lesson study. Having a set curriculum and standardized textbooks that you can have as a kind of common starting point almost for a lesson study.
I think
that's been very difficult in the UK because we don't have any sort of shared curriculum or progression or shared knowledge of lessons that can be studied in depth as they are in Japan. So that's been one of the sort of problematic issues with lesson study in the UK, that we don't have lessons that everybody knows and can think about together.
Yeah, so let me show you something if I can find that. Okay, here you go. So I mean, you might have seen this slides before, but this is from somebody else's work. I did not create this, but again, like, so in Japan, because in the US, you're right, what you said is right. They spend so much time on choosing curriculum, writing curriculum, aligning curriculum, writing local standards, right? And then plan lessons individually. And so they don't have time to do lessons collaboratively or watch and discuss each other's lessons. Japanese case though, because the lessons are done for you already. So then, the plan lessons individually is, they take a little bit of time on that, but they take a lot of time on other aspects of it, right? So that they talk about the lessons because the curriculum is done. Curriculum in this case means textbook curriculum. So they plan it collaboratively, watch and discuss each other. So they use their time, a lot of their non-teaching time for that one. So that creates a very different teaching culture. Yeah, if you can imagine that.
Yeah. Is that written up somewhere? Sarah's asking about this as well. It would be great if you could share that slide or the paper that was published by that particular colleague. We have a couple of minutes left. I also want to ask Tessa, maybe if you have some experiences from the schools that you're working with to share. And I know that Ed was also raising his hand to maybe share some of the experiences that you have in other countries. Maybe Tessa, you want to introduce yourself as well and the kind of work that you're doing with schools.
Yes, hi. So my name is Tessa. I'm a PhD student at a teacher education and also the VU. And I'm also an elementary school teacher. And for my final study within my PhD project, which is planned to start next year, college year, I may want to do lesson study with pre-service teachers with the goal of improving their differentiation skills within science and technology education.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, I thought you said something about assessing the students or I get confused with students, pupils, and the pre-service teachers.
I know.
You also assess the pre-service teachers learning with portfolio assessment. I was curious what you assess. How do you because it was part of their pre-service teacher education.
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. So in my course, all through the lesson study time, I made sure that each group kept the record of what they did, right? So that each meeting, there's a note taker, they took notes, as well as like if they did student assessment, the data has, just like 15 years ago, actually, we actually had physical things to keep in a file, but like toward, I don't know, 2012, 2015, everything became electronic, but they have electronic folder to keep all the work. So after all the lesson study process is done, what I did was ask each group to look at all the things you did throughout the lesson study from the beginning of goal setting to the debrief. And then I wanted them to choose, this is like a really authentic portfolio assessment, but as a group, that I wanted them to choose the activity that they enjoyed the most, the activity that they found the most challenging, the activity that they learned from the most, and the activity that they don't think that was helpful to them at all. And then like fifth one, I think that was their choice. And then I wanted them to choose one representation of those items and then wrote about it, what that meant. And then they had a presentation in my class for the whole group, whole class, that what their chosen activities were. And so that was the group assessment. And and then, as a course, or as a like a 3-semester course, at the end, I did have each student write individual reflection paper on what they learned from, doing lesson study. But I'm happy to share my things with you, Tessa, if you're interested. And your study sounds interesting, and I'm happy to be, be any help.
Yeah,
that you need.
yeah,
Yes,
great.
yes, thank you very much. Yes.
Brilliant.
Sarah had a hand up, but you okay?
Yeah, we have 1 minute left. So maybe Ed, I know you wanted to have a final reflection perhaps. Or credit.
I think like what Sarah said, in the Dutch context, it is difficult to get pre-service students, but also teachers together around one particular topic, because everybody at a certain point in time is teaching different topics. And so also our student teachers are teaching different topics at the same time. So it's very difficult to get them around one topic. So what we did also in a professional learning community that we were running at the Free University before with chemistry and physics, we make the focus formative assessment, and that is then the research, you could say.
Yeah.
And so the teachers, every time we come together, they prepare a lesson. Some teachers may be teaching this a similar topic, so they can do it together. Others do it alone. And then they prepare formative assessment, and they bring this assessment data back to the next meeting. And that is then, that is then when we discuss the learning difficulty of the pupils and of the students.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes perfect sense to choose kind of a more didactic pedagogical issue rather than a specific content area or topic to connect teachers around a kind of common issue.
But through the formative assessment,
you still, absolutely. Yeah, interesting. Well, time is up, unfortunately. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining and for participating in the discussion and sharing your insights. And thank you very much, Aki, for sharing your work and talking about the 2 models. Really interesting. And I do hope you can come back and talk about the work that you're starting to do in the Netherlands at some point, and hope we can kind of connect in the future around that particular work as well. That would be great.
Thank you so much. And please email me if you have questions, and